Hey guys, it's Colonel Strat here, the legendary extraordinaire. I'm back, and this is going to be my first Let's Play for Warhammer 3. Now, um, due to how low my channel is right now, I'm going to pick the characters and factions, and Let's Play through each race. So for right now, I figured the best one to start with would be the Empire. Now, the Empire has a lot of they're a lot more balanced as a race than other races. And some people could call them generic. And that it wouldn't be unwarranted. A human faction with in a game where there's so many other types of races to choose from, and it could seem a little bland. But the Empire does have enough spice and enough um, unique mechanics and units that really help define them and help them push beyond just the mundane, basic human faction. Now, we're going to be playing as Emperor Karl Franz, the leader of the Empire today, and he's got a few. He has a nice starting army with some handgunners and greatswords, some knights as well as some Reichsguard, and the mortars, and then some basic units. This is a decent starting army. His position's very centralized in the heart of the Empire, and Altdorf is a great starting position because it's connected to a sea lane, so you can get a lot of money and consolidate a lot of allies and a lot of contacts early on. Now, his effects are he has more diplomacy with other imperial factions, gets more prestige from battles, which prestige is going to be a very good resource to monitor, especially in the late campaign because it helps you achieve one of the campaign's goals. Has recruit rank +2 for lords, which helps with starting up new armies, and movement range +10% for all armies, which really helps you catch those fleeing units and fleeing armies, those pesky beastmen that try to outrun imperial armies in the later game. So that really helps comes through. Now his personal lord effects, he can replenish a neutral territory, which is really big. It's a really big and nice change they added to Karl Franz in the least recent updates. So it allows him to replenish in neutral territory, meaning non-hostile territory. So it makes sense and allows him to keep his army moving, especially if there's a like a neutral faction between him and his enemy. He has upkeep reduction for greatswords and Reichsguard, which is really good as well for fielding those units, because we're going to field a lot of greatswords. And I mean, Reichsguard aren't the best cavalry in the game, but they are a decent cavalry unit. There's another one that's pretty good for the Empire that I'll probably use instead, but Reichsguard are a decent unit. Guardian for Reichsguard and greatswords units, which Guardian is a great trait to have. More physical resistance means that they take less damage from physical attacks, meaning non-magical attacks. So that really helps out, especially with the enemies that we'll face around here. Most of them are non-magic dealing attacks. And then charge bonus +10. That helps the cavalry out. So with that being said, for the campaign difficulty, since this is not a hardcore campaign, I'm going to keep it at normal, because I believe that normal is the optimal way to play the game. Later on, when I revisit the faction and revisit the campaign Let's Play, I'll probably start one with on Legendary for hardcore. But the more harder you get, like hard, very hard Legendary, the more the AI gets cheats, and it's designed to make it more challenging. But I believe normal is the perfect balance of challenge, and some factions are even easy on Legendary. Some are. The battle difficulty is just gives them more penalties and buffs the enemy as it gets harder. But I like starting my first Let's Plays on a level playing field. Alright, so the in-game difficulty we're going to keep at 100 so that it's standard. Early warning timer here. I think 10 is enough units. Sea lanes, in-game scenarios. We're not going to have Ultimate Crisis on because that's going to be another Let's Play series as well. I'm not going to enable diplomacy because that makes it extra challenging. I am going to increase the range though to 250, or as close as I can get to 250. That gives me enough range for it to trigger, enough time to consolidate my resources. I'm going to keep all the scenarios checked because I like a little spice. These endgame scenarios that CA added are very, very interesting and make the campaign very fun to play no matter what faction you're playing. Battle realism, yeah, I'll probably keep that on. Yeah, makes it more interesting. Alright, and with that, we'll start the campaign. So, in the future, I'm hoping to cover the Empire in greater detail. They really are such a good all-rounded faction because they have access to units that can perform every single type of role. They just aren't the masters of any role. They're a jack of all trades type of faction. And I will cover them more in detail in the future in my So You Want to Play videos. But I figured they were the best faction to start the Let's Play series with, because they really are the most iconic faction in the Warhammer franchise. Like, they're the ones that get most of the books. They're the ones that get most of the screen time, have most of the legendary characters. There are other factions and races that have predominant legendary characters and are more important to the storyline, but the Empire are always the most relatable, because they're humans. So that's why they get the most talked about. Alrighty.
Now is the time, men of the Empire, to unite!
That is right, Mr. Franz. Alright, so here's how they play. So we use Prestige here. Imperial authority and prestige, earned throughout our campaign to dictate the outcome of political dilemmas and manipulate relationships between the Empire states. Now what that means is that if we look at this, at the elector counts, the fealty here, the more prestige we have, the more we can increase this slider up here. And that increases the fealty chance for the electors to side with us. It's like a big old court system, the Empire. Everyone's, talking about each other behind each other's backs. And, Karl here has to really struggle to get everyone to, play nice. There's all these different demons and warring factions, orcs and elves, and hell, right up here is one of the new chaos factions. But most of the Imperials that he has to deal with are interested in their own petty squabbles. Now, Imperial authority helps you uphold your power, and it really increases the fealty itself. But you spend prestige to increase your authority, or there are certain random dilemmas that happen throughout your campaign, like certain settlements will get attacked by random AI armies, and you can use to spend your prestige to protect that faction or just let them die. It really is a nice system where you're trying to roleplay as the Emperor, trying to hold the Empire together and keep it from falling apart. That's why I like this campaign so much. Alright, and then it increases the collector accounts fealty, and then they can confederate, which basically means that they'll join your faction and give you all access to their settlements and and armies and everything will completely be absorbed by your faction, which is the goal, to unite the empire. And then when you get control of these different different states, which we can see in the elector count screen, once you get control of each of these states, you'll get both a special item, well, a special trait for the lord who has it. Like here, Emperor Franz has the elector count of Reichland, which increases his research rate to the faction, recruit rate for Empire Knights, and upkeep for -5% for state troops. And then a special weapon that can be equipped. I think it's by everyone now. It just gives you the weapon, and you can equip it by anyone. And then you get access to a state troop, which is a special type of a random troop that you can recruit once every so many turns. So, like the Karlberg Greatswords here, they have a couple special traits, like the bleeding trait. If it'll let me view it. It's got the bleeding trait, and it's got an unbreakable, which is really good for a infantry unit. Keeps them in the fight longer, and they won't rout until they're all dead. Can be good, but also can be bad. But for a greatsword unit, that's really good because they're one of the best units the Empire can field. So yeah, that's what the whole elector count system is now. Each elector count has these special items and units. And the goal of the Empire campaign is to take all of these elector count positions, including the vampires, which means you have to eventually go to war with the vampires. If an elector count is killed, you will lose some prestige in authority, which can be a little annoying, especially the more that there's different enemies. Like the introduction of Festus up here really, when he first came out, it really screwed with the whole fealty system, because he would just obliterate this faction right here, Hochland. He would just obliterate them in like 10 turns, and you would immediately lose authority and be at like negative authority, which really hurts. It really hurts to have negative authority, minus growth income, and you lose fealty. You have a chance to lose fealty, and then if it goes all the way down there, civil war will be erupted, and all elector counts will attack you, which is not ideal because your goal is unity, not division. Now you can go through the Civil War and just conquer it all by hand, but it truly is easier just to confederate, because when you're trading with all of these empire factions, which naturally will have some likeness to you, like even here, Midland, with Boris still likes us a little bit just because we're the same faction. That's what ruler's tolerance means. We're either the same race, or we're a race that aligns with them. Whereas they don't like us because we have historical relations with them. So they're kind of set up to have enemies and allies, and the best way for the Imperials to capitalize it is to make sure that they confederate rather than fight themselves, because there's plenty of other enemies to fight. Okay, so first things first, we're going to upgrade Altdorf. So we upgrade, go up to 4 construction slots, which will really help us increase the garrison and all that nice juicy stuff. We got a good amount of money, so what we're gonna do is now for the technology. Best technologies to invest in would be, I usually do infantry or trade and industry, because or imperial colleges, because that helps you can either help with growth, control, income and industry, or your infantry units, which are going to field a lot of infantry units. And the state-issued infantry armor is very, very good to have, because that's 15. When you get great swords, that'll mean that the great swords will have 100 armor, which, if you watched my Warhammer Explained, or so you want to play Warhammer video, 100 armor can mean that you have almost 100, that you have 100% chance to negate all non-armor piercing fire, which is really, really good, especially against some of the factions that the Empire fights who have low armor piercing damage. So I'm going to start with state troop standards, and then if you see this arrow, you can actually plan a route to another technology. So it'll take all the prerequisites. So if I click this, so then it'll say how many turns in total it'll take to reach that. So it'll take 5 turns here and an extra 7 turns here to get it. But by 12 turns, I'll have state-issued armor. So with that, let me introduce you to Karl Franz. Now, he starts with Dragon's Tooth because he's the Elector Count of Reichland, which gives him a bonus weapon strength, magical attacks, which really helps him against physical resistant enemies. Income from post-battle loot, which helps him gain a lot of cash right after battles are fought, which can help you get a huge treasury if you're fighting a lot of enemies. Melee attack plus 6, weapon strength plus 10%, and the ability to Reichland Runefang, which is an augment that he can apply to his units to increase their melee attack and leadership. He's a really strong starting character because he's high armor, high leadership, because he's a hero. Speed is not so good, but his melee attack is 71 with magical attacks. Weapon strength is 363 armor piercing, 517 overall. Melee defense is not so great, but his charge bonus is good. And he's got 15 missile resistance, immune to psychology. He's a siege attacker, which is a really good trait to have because that means he can knock down enemy gates. You don't have to siege out enemy major settlements, and that can be a really big thorn in your side when you don't have a siege attacker trait on a unit. It can really hurt you. So he's got all this, and he's got his trait of Emperor that gives him, the bonus passive ability for Reichsguard and Great Swords and up creep and replenish and all that. And then, we don't have any skills yet, and he's got his quest for his items: the Beast Slayer, Drakewald Runefang, Gul Moraz, which is his legendary hammer, which really is something you'll want to try to get because sundering attacks are really good, and he gives more armor piercing damage. His Gul Moraz ability really helps him turns him into a Lord Sniper. And then, of course, he has the emblems of the Emperor, which really helps with diplomatic relations and helps towards his main goal. Alright. Now right here is the Elector State Troops. Now we have one unlocked, and you see that it says 15 up here. That means we have 15 turns to wait before we can recruit another one of these units. I'm not I think you can only have one of each state troop. I'm not sure if they added an ability to recruit multiple, but once we are able to, we will recruit these guys because they do have a really good couple traits compared to regular great swords. But physical resistance that we get is enough to make these great swords really effective. Alright, so we're going to fight this battle first here against the Empire Secessionists. This is one of the first battles that you'll ever fight in this campaign. Most campaigns start with an enemy army or an enemy settlement to take on the first turn. Keeps it interesting. Alright, so let's jump into this first battle. So it's going to be a decisive victory, but I like to start my Let's Plays by having a battle. I will fight most of the battles, even if they are decisive victories, just so I can, show off the meat of Total War, because that's really what everyone comes to see. Comes to see me smash up enemies and Let's scout the terrain, see what we're going to fight here. Terrain will usually be dependent on where you're at in the map, which I'm expecting lowlands. A little bit of a hill, nothing too bad. And it's not like I have any... I only have like one real fast unit, and he has pretty basic units, so it'll be a pretty one-sided fight. Because Karl Franz starts with some pretty overpowered units compared to the Empire Secessionists. And the Empire was actually my first campaign back on when Warhammer 1 released, because they were the most relatable to me. I wasn't a big Warhammer fan, at least I was of the 40k universe, but I hadn't really delved much into fantasy, and I really fell in love with the character. You know, he's a young prince that became emperor, and he's trying to keep his country together. So it's a very desperate struggle towards the end of the game when you're trying to keep everyone together and happy, and you know, humans with our petty differences just can't seem to do that. Alright. Yeah, these great swords just look so majestic, don't they? Just look so majestic. Really heavily armored, really high damaging unit. One that we'll have to keep alive, because they're going to be very useful in the late game. If we can keep these guys alive, they'll gain more experience and become better over time. Alright, and then we have basic swordsman, classic, lightly armored, but have a shield. So they would be my front line, but they don't have a lot of armor. They do have a shield though that helps them. Their stats are very abysmal. Like, barely any of their stats, bar from leadership, really gets over 35. In fact, none of them get even to 35. But then you look at the great swords, and yeah, some of their stats are kind of similar, but their armor stat and their weapon strength stat is what really shows up. And then they also get a bonus against infantry, which helps them deal extra damage to infantry units, which just supports their role as a front line. And then we have two handgunners. Really good unit, because they have armor-piercing missiles, really heavy. Not a lot of armor-piercing missile damage, but all their damage that they do have is armor-piercing. And it's 17, which isn't the greatest. There are a lot better missile units, but handgunners do their job well, and they really do shred armor. The bonus they have is their entities. A lot of units that have higher melee or missile attack damage, they have less entities. So you got to really put that into perspective as well. It's one way you balance the game by making their damage on paper smaller, but they have more entities. And they don't fire in an arc, they have to fire in a straight line, so it's really imperative to get them in a area where they can do their fire, like a hill up here. This is a perfect zone right up here for them. So I'm going to try to put one up here on the hill. And I might even put one on this hill. And to defend them, I'm going to have two swordsmen guard this entrance here, with the halberdiers right over here. And then the great swords be in the back, because I want to try to protect them. The artillery mortars are going to, again, be in the back here, and the Reichsguard as well. Franz himself, see that blue aura he's got? That's an encourage aura. Now, encourage increases the leadership of nearby allies, so it's imperative to keep Franz with his units, because he is a buffer hero at heart, but you can make him and build him to make him a damage dealer. But he does buff his troops more than he damages enemies. So let's start the game, and I'll get everyone into position.
Quick march! Take Position! Swordsmen! To battle! Missiles will fly! For Heldenhammer! To battle! Yes, sir! Sir! Formation march!
It's all about forming up the formations, guarding the flanks.
Now! My subjects call! At your
Oh shit,
service!
that's not good. We're under missile fire here, but I think I can return the missile fire. Yeah, that's the downside to handgunners, is that they don't have, if they don't have a way to fire, they can be susceptible to missile fire, like that. So that was a bad play there.
Ready for war! Yes, General! Fighting range, sir! Water!
But if we have the mortar team deal with that, and then we send the knights back to flank them.
Swordsmen! Standing by! For Altdorf! Very well! Great swords! At speed! Take the ground! Reichsguard knights!
We could do it. We can outflank their missile units and smash into them. Gotta make sure that we don't have our artillery fire at our charging units, because that'll just do damage to us. See, missile units for the Empire don't have any real defense against melee units. The most high ground you have is the better your units are going to do. So, having these handgunners up on this hill means they could fire to the flank. Of course, if you have this arrow, this right here means you're obstructed. It means you're not going to be able to fire, so you'll have to find a better position. So, again, finding a better position could mean just going around the sides here, so you could fire to the side, but your handgunners don't want to fire, or your missile units don't want to fire into their own men. So they're gonna try to avoid that. So if your men get in front, unfortunately they're just on their own.
For Heldenhammer! Prepare for combat! Missile troops! No lingering!
Here's a good play right here, though. This is what we call hammer and anvil. So our infantry is holding these guys here, and they're about to be routed anyway. We've decimated them with this strat. Bit of a rocky beginning, but there's always going to be units that are going to promote a challenge. And one drawback to having massive, damaging missile units is that they're not going to want to fire on their own enemy, on their own allies. So, because they only have a straight line type of fire arc, they can't fire up and over their allies. They have to fire straight through to the enemy. That means they have to fire into the flanks to do the most damage. But they do a lot of damage when they get to fire. Now it comes to phase where you try to run down as much of the enemy as possible to prevent them from surviving on the campaign map. It is a beautiful thing to watch them fly and chunks fly. Really makes me love and appreciate the graphics of the game. But having routed the enemy, what are you guys doing? Just, I guess that's a glitch. Well,
Prepare for combat!
Okay.
Moving now.
Wonder if they'll interact with them. Oh, okay. They will. Okay. I guess they were just there. Alright, and with that, we'll end the battle. A quick 5 minutes. Decisive victory. So really, using the terrain to your advantage can work for a lot of factions. Again, the Empire isn't solely a defensive faction like the Dwarves were. They're more of a jack-of-all-trades type of faction. So they have units that can defend, but they're not going to be the best at it. So if you don't have a nice anvil to help your hammer, you're not going to do real well. But you see the most dominating units were the handgunners and the Reichsguard. Really, really good units. We only lost 65. Killed quite a bit of the enemy. Again, it was a pretty uneven fight. I had really good units compared to his. Later on in the campaign, it'll be harder to determine because you'll fight more than just other humans. In fact, pretty early on, you'll start fighting chaos and beastmen, and maybe even some orcs, maybe some vampires. It can get pretty wild as the Empire, and you can start to feel like you're the underdog. Alright, so post-battle report. Got about 644 in loot, and a bunch of experience for old Karl here. And then some prestige, which is very, very good to have and to load up on. And we're going to take that. Then we have selections for what we want to do with the prisoners the enemy captured. Now we can sell them, get some little bit of treasury buff. We can take on the captives and replenish our troops that were lost, which would bring us back to full strength. Or we could kill them and get some unit experience to help rank these guys up. But because the Empire is more focused on uniting and trying to keep everyone at full strength, I'm going to take on captives. I usually do that as this faction because having a full strength unit will mean it performs better in combat. And if you're trying to go on the warpath to another battle, you want to keep them up as much as possible. So I'm going to take on captives, and it kills the army because they were too low on units. Killing the Lord really helps to kill the army too, but if they're low enough on units, the army will vanish on the campaign map. So I forgot to show you electoral machinations. Now we can use our prestige to help boost relations with other factions as well. I usually keep it because there are events that occur that will cost prestige. If you don't have it, it'll just end up hurting your fealty, your authority. So I usually withhold from the electoral machinations until the late game, because then you're going to want to try to convince the straggling imperial factions to finally join you. But by then you'll have so much prestige because you'll be fighting battle after battle. Because Karl's buff applies faction-wide, you'll have so much prestige that you won't have to worry about it. But I usually try not to use this until I have at least 1,000, because all the events will cost 1,000 prestige.
Bring me to my men.
All right, so we still have enough movement. So we only took about 73%, so we're going to be able to take Grunberg here. Now, Grunberg, again, starting faction, but we're going to have a Pyrrhic victory here. So I could elect to attack with this one too, spare me from having to recruit a swordsman unit. A lot of times I don't mind this because it's just a settlement garrison. And let's see, because it was only upgraded to tier 1, so there's going to be a land battle. It's pretty even terrain. Again, the Empire is not a solely defensive faction, so you don't have to really worry about terrain. I am going to fight this one, though. I'm going to quick save before it, just in case something goes wrong. But I am going to fight this one to try to save me from losing a unit, because that'll really hurt my momentum in order to stomp out these secessionists. And again, like I said in my So You Want to Play Warhammer video, the auto-resolve technically favors more health points of a unit. And a lot of times they can view that if you have less health points or less entities in a unit, that you'll fail, even though the units are better. The crossbowmen are probably the deciding factor in this, but it's the only range unit, so I can pin them down pretty easily. So when the enemy has multiple ranged units, that it becomes a little harder to pin them down. The Empire, and specifically Karl himself, starts with a pretty decent cavalry unit that can pin down enemy ranged units. So the crossbowmen are there. They're probably going to stay in the front and the back. So I'll combine the great swords, halberdiers, and swordsmen into a front line. I'll have my handgunners on the sides. Mortars in the back. And Reichsguard on the side, on the right-hand side, so they can do a circle charge. And then I'll put good old Karl in the middle, provide the most encouraging buff. Start the battle. Enemies marching towards us. Let's get our... Let's have them focus on... Yep, him. Again, long-range artillery, really good to have in the opening phases, to have them target specific units to deal the most damage. Now, they don't have a lord, but they do have a fill-in unit that's acting as a lord and provides an encouragement buff. If you kill him, a leadership buff will entail, even if you just rout the unit. It counts as a kill if you rout the unit. Alright, so as they're getting closer, it's time to choose targets.
Great swords! Charge! What do you bid? The Empire endures! Quick march! Understood! Go! The Empire endures! Prepare for combat!
Now the handgunners here have taken a bit of a beating, so they're shaken because their morale, their leadership has dropped a little low. But now they won't take any more beatings because my Reichsguard are in the back chewing up the crossbowmen. So now we'll activate his special, giving them more melee attack and damage. Have our handgunners go to the sides, and already we're seeing a huge turn in the battle, a huge shift. And it took only 2 minutes to rout this army, and barely lost anybody. Now, I don't have to continue fighting this army because it's a settlement garrison, so they're going to automatically be destroyed whenever I win the battle. So if you win, you automatically destroy this army. You don't have to worry about chasing it down. So again, another decisive victory due to masterful tactics. Only lost 22 in that battle, and you see how we took that Pyrrhic victory and made it decisive. It just takes a little bit of technical input, and you can change around what the AI thinks is going to happen, because the AI just plans it as two armies clashing in open battle. they don't take into effect the different tactics that you have to take. So you can really turn the auto resolve, what could have been a Pyrrhic victory if you were lazy, if you just play the battle, you could turn it around if you know how to exploit the enemy's weaknesses and you know how to capitalize on your strengths. Like the Empire has a strength of having a unit for every different situation, so they can cover potential weaknesses and they can exploit potential weaknesses in the enemy. So that's what the Empire is all about. So having killed these ones, again, the Great Swords performed probably the best. Them and the Reichsguard, and the Mortar did pretty well too. You can see how much damage dealt and the gold value. The gold value dictates how wealthy the unit is depending on how good it did. It's like right here, the gold value of this mortar was almost 500 with how much kills it did. And also one of our handgunners gained an experience rank. Now, experience rank increases their leadership, melee and attack and defense, and the accuracy of a missile unit. For, I believe, for melee units, it's weapon strength. So it really helps to get some experienced units in the late game. Alright, so now that we've taken a settlement, we could choose to occupy it, which will just give it a little bit of instability and some conquest penalty to the overall population here. Or we could loot it, get some money, replenishment for our troops, but increase the penalties. Sack it, meaning we don't take it, we just get a bunch of plunder and more instability, or raise it to the ground, burn it, and take what's left. Now, again, to play the Empire, you got to try to always choose the replenish option, because your units are always going to do better when they're at full strength. Certain units, certain factions do better when units are at half or even almost dead, but the Empire performs way better when their units are at full strength because of their lowish morale. So I'm going to loot and occupy, which will give a instability buff, well, debuff to the settlement, but will give me some money and give me some replenishment for my units and replenishment back to full. Now I've gained a weapon that I can give to another hero or lord, and Karl Franz has gained a couple levels. Okay, so we go to him. He's rank 3. Now I'm using a mod that increases the amount of experience points you get per level. I always felt that it was a bit sad that the original game had you focus on one line or another. I mean, I got the strategy for that, but I did like having to eventually be able to fill up this this screen. I mean, call me a completionist or OCD, but I always liked doing that. Alright, so the first skills you usually get are Inspiring Presence. Now for the Empire, that increases their unit gain, which helps get more experience, and the units will get better over time just by sitting there. So I usually get that. Usually get Hard to Hit, which increases Karl's melee defense to help him survive longer in battle, and Route Marcher, which gives him more chances to, more campaign movement range to reach others. And then I get his special Hold the Line, which really helps, him in a support role. Those skills are what I usually start with because they're some of the best skills that he has, especially as a support hero. So, and then you have auxiliaries that you can add on as well to increase his kit. He's only got a couple right now that, the messenger's good for more movement range, and control is always nice, but they're not great. We'll take a better look at this later in the campaign because we'll start to get more auxiliary. The more battles you fight, And the more quest objectives and campaign objectives you complete means that you'll have the more stuff you'll get. So like right now, our short victory: defeat the Empire Secessionists, the Borrow Legion of Sylvania, and control 30 settlements, which is pretty simple achievement to have. But what I'm going for is either a long campaign victory, which you have to control all the empire through vassals or direct ownership and achieve short victory, or domination. Control every settlement in the game. Every settlement. Which I'm probably going to go for domination with this campaign towards the end. But we'll have stop points when we achieve each victory type. Okay, so when you loot and occupy a settlement, the buildings get damaged, and you'll have to pay gold to repair them, which kind of negates the whole cost for what you actually got from the settlement, especially if the settlement was not high ranking. So if it's a tier 2 or 3, it'll just go down a tier, but the other building will be damaged. It takes one turn to repair it, and then it'll start getting those buffs and income. But I think it's worth it in the end for the replenishment, because it keeps your units buffed up and going, and keeps them on the move, keeps your army on the move. Now that Karl has expended his movement points, it's time to recruit units. Now, there's 2 different recruitment pools: local Reichland and global. Global is useful for when you're far away on an expedition. Let's say you're like over in Ulthuan, or you're going down to Southlands or Telestria, or up to Norsca to fight the Norskins or the Chaos. And all your main buildings back here are the ones that can recruit units. You go into the global recruitment. Even though it takes an extra turn or 2, you'll still have access to those units. You'll have to be encamped, which is a special stance, to be able to use them outside your territory. You can also use them when you're in a settlement like he is right now. Otherwise, you have to use local. Now, right now we only have Reichland, so we're just going to use the local. It's faster, and so we're probably going to, and it's also cheaper. The global recruitment costs a little bit more because you gotta think it takes time and more. You gotta pay them more to have them go to you when you're far away than when they're right here at your doorstep. So it makes sense. So I'm going to buff up the front line with swordsman unit, and then maybe buff up the missile line with either an archer or a free company militia. Free company militia are not the best because their missile strength is so low, but archers as well aren't the best either because they lack armor piercing. But you're not going to fight a lot of armored units in the early game, so archers with their upkeep costs are really cost effective. Swordsmen are decent, and having a good decent melee line will help. The fact that I start with 2 handgunner units and a mortar thinks that I should just buff up my main line because it's kind of small, and the great swords, the halberdiers more complement the front line than the swordsmen do. So I'm just going to do 2 swordsmen, and that'll conclude turn 1. Now this episode here kind of seems like it's a bit short. We had 2 battles, but we only did 1 turn, and there's so many other turns to do. The future episodes will have more end turns, because I assure you, got a special hero. I assure you that this first one was just kind of explaining how they work, because I will have a more in-depth video covering the Empire and how they work, but this was more of just the introduction video. Now we got an Amber Wizard here, The Empire has a special, whole bunch of special wizard types. They have access to almost every magic type, bar vampire magic and high magic for the high elves. They have a decent roster of magical heroes. I don't really use an Amber Wizard that much, and this early in the campaign, he's going to be more of a hindrance because he doesn't have access to any spells yet, other than the Wild form, which does help, but only affects. Well, it does affect units in range, so it could help. And always another buffing hero would be great. So I'm going to take all help I can get, put him into the army, and then move Karl down here. Again, as you're moving around as the Empire, you'll want to try to fill up as many units as possible because your early game units are cheap, and you have the income to sustain them. So I'm going to do another swordsman, and make 2 more swordsmen to make a proper 6 swordsman front line. Alright, and with that, this will conclude episode 1. Again, this was kind of an introduction to the Empire. For the Let's Play, the Let's Plays that come out after this will have many more end turns and fights, but we run our 2 beginner fights, and we decimated the foes, we decimated the secessionists, and now for next turn, well, for next video, next week, I will return to the campaign. We'll take Karl to Ubersreck, and maybe hit Helmgart, and then Elehart, and finally secure the province, and then we'll start thinking about expanding, maybe towards Midland, maybe trying to convince Nuln, or attacking the dwarves, or I believe Kemmler is around here, a vampire lord, or maybe trying to take Marienburg. But there's so many ways of expansion as the Empire. The next video next week, we will focus on consolidating Reichland and then pushing forward to greatness. Alright, that'll be all from me. Alright, Strat fans, keep it strategic, and remember to tune in next week for the continuation of this grand campaign. Alright, Strat fans, keep it strategic. Colonel out.